Long before towers, telescopes, or satellites, human beings looked up and did not see emptiness. They saw watchers. They saw judgment. They saw memory written in fire across deserts, river valleys, mountains, and ruined cities. The same strange pattern returns. Gods descending from above, messengers crossing the sky, rulers claiming power from the heavens, and stars treated not as distant lights, but as living signs. The Anunnaki are famous now because modern myth has pulled them into the language of aliens and ancient machines. But they were never alone. They were part of something much older and much wider. To understand why, we have to slow down. Not every heavenly god was a visitor from space. Not every myth was a record of machines. Ancient people were not confused children staring at the dark. They were careful observers, poets, priests, farmers, kings, and mourners, trying to understand a world that could bless them with rain one season and bury them in famine the next. The sky was where order seemed to live, and so the story begins there, above the fields, above the temples, above the first cities waking under constellations that had already watched thousands of generations come and go. Before we venture further into the shadows, take a moment to subscribe so you never miss a secret that history has tried to forget. And as we begin, leave a comment letting us know where in the world you are watching from tonight. It's a reminder of how far these forgotten echoes can reach. Tonight, we are not chasing a simple answer. We are following a human habit older than writing itself, the need to look upward and wonder whether something was looking back. Chapter 2. Before the Anunnaki became a modern myth. The name sounds heavier now than it once did. Anunnaki. For many modern listeners, it arrives already surrounded by images, enormous beings, hidden planets, forbidden technology, lost genetic experiments, ancient spacecraft lowering themselves over the plains of Mesopotamia. The word has become less like a religious term and more like a doorway into an entire alternative history. But before the Anunnaki became modern myth, they belonged to an older and stranger world. Not a world of laboratories and star maps, but of temples, offerings, city gods, royal authority, and divine assemblies. In the surviving traditions of ancient Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki were not a single simple thing. Their identity shifted across time, language, and text. In Sumerian and Akkadian religious literature, they appear as a group of deities connected with the divine order. Sometimes they are associated with the great gods, sometimes with the underworld. Sometimes they seem to belong to the background machinery of sacred authority, not as individual characters with long biographies, but as a collective presence. That matters, because one of the easiest mistakes we make with ancient religion is to treat it like a fixed encyclopedia. We want every god to have a clean profile, a job title, a family tree, a home address in the heavens, and preferably a dramatic origin story. Ancient belief rarely behaves so neatly. It changes from city to city, century to century, and ritual to ritual. A name that means one thing in one text may carry a different shade of meaning in another. The Anunnaki were part of that living religious landscape. They belonged to a civilization where the divine was not distant from politics or nature. A city was not merely a place where people lived. It was protected, owned, and in some sense animated by its god. Kings ruled with divine approval. Harvests depended on forces humans could petition but not control. The underworld had its own hierarchy. The heavens had their own order. The gods were not simply characters in stories. They were woven into the structure of reality. So when ancient texts speak of divine beings descending, gathering, judging, or granting authority, we have to listen carefully. These are not automatically eyewitness reports in the modern sense. They are religious expressions from a world where heaven, earth, and the underworld were connected layers of existence. And yet, it is exactly this layered language that later generations found so tempting. A god comes down from the sky. A king receives power from above. A divine council decides the fate of humanity. To a modern imagination raised on rockets, lunar landings, satellites, and science fiction, such images can begin to look mechanical. The sacred mountain becomes a launch platform. The shining god becomes an astronaut. The heavenly realm becomes outer space. This is where the modern Anunnaki begin to separate from the ancient ones. The ancient texts did not need aliens to make the gods powerful. They already had a cosmos full of meaning. The sky was not empty distance. It was authority. It was destiny. It was the place from which order descended into the fragile human world. But in the 20th century, especially as space travel entered public imagination, some writers began to read ancient mythology through a new lens. The old gods were recast as visitors from other planets. Myth became misunderstood technology. Ritual became memory of contact. Symbol became blueprint. That approach can feel exciting because it seems to solve several mysteries at once. Why did ancient people build monumental structures? Why did they track the heavens so carefully? Why did so many cultures speak of gods from above? The ancient astronaut idea offers a dramatic answer. Because someone came here. The difficulty is that drama is not the same as evidence. When we return to the Mesopotamian material itself, the picture becomes more restrained, more complex, and in some ways more interesting. The Anunnaki do not appear as a neatly described race of extraterrestrial engineers. They appear inside religious poetry, mythic narrative, temple ideology, and theological imagination. Their role is powerful, but not modern in the way modern legend often wants it to be. And this is where the mystery becomes more human. The question is not only, were they real visitors? The deeper question is why the idea of visitors became so persuasive. Why did these ancient names, preserved in clay tablets and scholarly translation, become magnets for theories about hidden origins? Why did the Anunnaki, more than many other divine groups, become the center of a modern story about humanity being shaped from outside? Part of the answer lies in Mesopotamia itself. This was one of the great cradles of urban civilization: writing, law, accounting, kingship, temple economies, mythic literature. So much that feels foundational to history emerges there in early and powerful forms. When modern people search for beginnings, Mesopotamia feels like a natural place to look. And when the earliest records speak of gods who order the world, it is easy for speculation to slip into the gaps. The gaps are real. The problem is what we put inside them. A broken tablet is not an invitation to invent an entire lost science. A poetic image is not automatically a technical manual. A divine descent is not necessarily a landing sequence. Ancient people used metaphor not because they were primitive, but because metaphor was one of the most precise tools they had for speaking about forces too large for ordinary language. Storms, fertility, death, kingship, time, fate. These were not small subjects. They demanded a language bigger than daily life. So before we follow sky gods across Egypt, India, Greece, and the Americas, the Anunnaki teach us a necessary caution. The past is not made clearer by flattening it into our favorite modern shapes. Sometimes mystery survives not because evidence has been hidden, but because ancient thought was richer than our categories. The Anunnaki were not born as a science fiction species. They became one. And between those two versions, the ancient divine assembly and the modern cosmic legend, lies one of the most revealing transformations in the history of myth. Chapter 3. The gods who came down from the mountains of heaven. In the ancient Mesopotamian imagination, heaven was not the cold emptiness we picture today. It was not a black vacuum waiting beyond the atmosphere, measured in light years and crossed by machines. It was nearer than that, more intimate, and more dangerous. It pressed down over the world like a sacred ceiling. It held the stars in their courses. It governed signs, seasons, kings, storms, and judgment. Above human life was not nothing. Above human life was order. This is one reason the language of descent matters so much. When a god comes down in ancient myth, the image does not necessarily mean a physical body traveling through outer space. It can mean authority entering the human realm. It can mean a divine decision becoming visible. It can mean the hidden architecture of the cosmos touching the ground, in a temple, in a king, in a storm, in a law, in a flood. For the people of Mesopotamia, the world was arranged vertically as much as horizontally. There was the human realm, where cities rose from mud brick and canals carried water through fields. There was the underworld, a place of the dead and of powers older and darker than daily life. And above, there was the realm of the great gods, a place associated with sky, height, and command. Height itself had meaning. A temple tower was not simply tall, because tall buildings are impressive, although they certainly are. Its height spoke a religious language. It lifted the sacred center of the city toward the divine realm. It made the temple into a meeting point between earth and heaven. To climb was not just to move upward, it was to approach a different layer of reality. This is where modern readings often become too literal too quickly. If we hear, "the gods descended from heaven," we may imagine figures dropping from the stars. But in a world of sacred geography, descent is also a statement about rank. The powerful come from above. Blessing comes from above. Judgment comes from above. Rain comes from above. Light comes from above. Even royal legitimacy comes from above. The sky was the great source of things humans could not command. And the Mesopotamians were not casual sky watchers. They inherited and developed careful habits of observing the heavens. The movements of celestial bodies were not treated as random decoration. They could be read as signs. Their order mattered because it suggested that the universe was not chaos. Behind the visible sky, there was intelligence. Not necessarily intelligence in the modern extraterrestrial sense, but intention, pattern, and will. That distinction is important. Ancient people could believe the heavens were alive with meaning, without believing in spacecraft. They could think the stars communicated divine order without imagining metal vehicles crossing the void. Their sky was not less sophisticated because it was sacred. It was sophisticated in a different language. The gods of Mesopotamia were deeply tied to this system of power. Some deities were linked with celestial bodies, others with storms, wisdom, fertility, war, justice, or the underworld. But even when a god was not simply a star or a planet, divine authority often carried a heavenly dimension. The high realm above human life was where decrees belonged before they entered history. Think of a king receiving kingship. To us, a crown may be political theater. In the ancient world, it could be a cosmic event. A ruler did not merely take power because he had soldiers, wealth, or bloodline. He needed legitimacy that reached beyond human agreement. The gods had to permit the city to be ruled. The throne was not only furniture, it was a place where heaven's decision touched earth's instability. That made kingship both magnificent and fragile. If the gods granted power, they could withdraw it. If the sky sent omens, those signs mattered. If disaster struck, famine, defeat, plague, flood, people did not automatically separate politics, weather, morality, and divine displeasure into different categories. All of these belonged to one connected world. This way of thinking can feel strange to us because modern life has trained us to divide reality into departments. Astronomy is one field, religion is another, agriculture is another, government is another, weather is another. But in Mesopotamia, the heavens could speak to all of them at once. That is why the gods coming down from heaven should not be treated as a simple line in a travel diary. It is a statement about how the ancient world was built. The divine did not have to be far away to be beyond reach. It did not have to live on another planet to be otherworldly. It only had to belong to a level of existence humans could see signs of, but never fully control. The stars were visible, yet untouchable. Storms were visible, yet uncontrollable. Death was visible, yet unanswered. Kingship was visible, yet always in need of invisible permission. The sacred lived in that tension, and perhaps that is why later readers were so drawn to Mesopotamian myth. It feels almost close enough to translate into modern terms. A heavenly council becomes an alien command structure. A divine decree becomes a mission. A sacred mountain becomes a base. The old language is flexible enough to be pulled into a new story. But something is lost in that translation. When the ancient gods descend, they do not merely move from one location to another. They bring meaning downward. They impose form on the vulnerable world below. They remind human beings that civilization, for all its walls and canals and royal inscriptions, exists under a sky it cannot own. And that may be the older mystery. Not whether someone came from the stars in the modern sense, but why human beings so consistently imagined authority as descending from above. Why power felt more convincing when it came from the sky. Why the highest truths were placed beyond the reach of hands. In Mesopotamia, the heavens were not empty space. They were the upper chamber of reality. And the gods who came down from that height were not just visitors. They were the shape of order entering a world that feared, more than almost anything, the return of chaos. Chapter 4. Egypt's Starborn Kingdom of the Dead. In Egypt, the sky was not only above the living, it was also waiting for the dead. To understand that world, we have to leave the mud-brick cities of Mesopotamia and enter a landscape where the horizon itself seemed to carry theology. The Nile flowed through the land like a dark, shining spine. The desert pressed close on either side. Above it all, night returned with a precision that could feel almost ceremonial. Stars appeared over tombs, temples, fields, and royal monuments. not as background, but as part of the kingdom's deepest language. Egyptian religion did not treat death as a simple ending. Death was a passage, a transformation, a dangerous journey into a realm where the human and divine could meet under strict conditions. For ordinary people, the afterlife was bound to judgment, ritual, memory, and proper burial. For the pharaoh, the matter was even larger. A king was not merely a political ruler who happened to die. He was a sacred being whose destiny touched the stars. This idea appears with special force in the oldest royal funerary traditions. The dead king was imagined ascending into the sky, joining the eternal order above, taking his place among divine and celestial powers. The stars that never seemed to set, often called the imperishable stars, became symbols of permanence. In a world where bodies decayed, dynasties ended, and flood levels rose or failed, those northern lights seemed immune to the ordinary fate of things. That permanence mattered. The pharaoh's power on earth was tied to cosmic stability. He was linked to Horus in life, the falcon god associated with kingship and the sky. In death, he could be connected with Osiris, the murdered and restored lord of the dead. These were not decorative associations. They formed a sacred grammar of rule. Horus suggested visible sovereignty, sharp-eyed and elevated. Osiris suggested endurance after rupture, order rebuilt after violence. Together, they gave kingship a depth no ordinary crown could provide. And then there is Isis. In the Osiris myth, Isis is not simply a grieving wife or magical mother. She is the intelligence of restoration. She gathers what has been broken, protects the vulnerable heir, and helps make continuity possible after catastrophe. Her role reminds us that Egyptian cosmic order was never automatic. It had to be defended, renewed, spoken, sung, enacted, and buried properly. Even the gods worked to hold the world together. This is one of the great differences between a living mythology and a modern fantasy of perfect ancient certainty. The Egyptian cosmos was ordered, yes, but it was not effortless. Disorder always pressed at the edges. Death, drought, invasion, illness, failed succession. Even the daily disappearance of the sun could all be understood as moments when order had to struggle back into place. The sky was where that struggle became visible. The sun's journey across the heavens and through the hidden night was not just a natural cycle. It was a sacred drama of disappearance and return. The moon changed shape and returned. Stars wheeled around the pole. Sirius appeared in seasonal rhythm and became deeply meaningful in Egyptian timekeeping and religious imagination. The heavens were full of patterns that seemed to promise that loss did not have the final word. So when Egyptian kings looked toward the stars after death, the point was not escape in the modern science fiction sense. It was integration into a cosmic order that outlasted the body. The dead pharaoh did not become an astronaut. He became part of a universe where divinity, kingship, and celestial permanence were already intertwined. The distinction may sound obvious, but it is often where modern interpretations drift. A pyramid aligned with celestial meaning becomes, in some retellings, evidence of lost technology. A star connection becomes a star origin. A myth of ascent becomes a literal launch. The ancient language is squeezed until it speaks in the accent of our own age. But Egypt does not need that translation to be astonishing. Its religious imagination was already vast. It placed the king between earth and sky, between Horus and Osiris. between the living Nile Valley and the silent celestial north. It turned death into a journey of transformation. It made architecture serve memory, ritual, and cosmic symbolism at once. It understood that a society survives not only by growing grain and collecting taxes, but by telling itself where the dead have gone and why the living still matter. This is where the Egyptian sky becomes more than astronomy. It becomes a moral landscape. The stars are not merely lights. They are witnesses to continuity. The afterlife is not merely survival. It is the restoration of rightful order. The pharaoh is not merely a man made divine by propaganda, though politics certainly lived inside the theology. He is a point of connection between visible rule and invisible permanence. And if we listen carefully, the Egyptian material changes the larger mystery. The question is no longer simply why gods come down from above. Here, divine power also returns upward. The king belongs to the earth for a time, but his final destiny is imagined in the sky. He receives heavenly legitimacy, rules in the valley, dies, and then moves toward a celestial form of endurance. A circle is formed. Power descends. Life is ordered. Death is transformed. The sky receives what the earth cannot keep. That is why Egypt's star-born kingdom of the dead has held the modern imagination so strongly. It offers a version of heaven that feels both remote and precise, poetic and architectural. Its monuments stand on the ground, but their meaning leans upward. Their stone bodies remain in the desert, while their religious ambition reaches into the dark, permanent lights above. And perhaps that is the quiet key. Ancient Egypt did not look at the sky and see emptiness waiting to be crossed. It saw a realm where kings could become more than memory, where gods guarded the fragile order of existence, and where death itself might be taught to follow a path. Chapter 5. The Watchers Above the Nile. The Nile made Egypt possible, but the sky helped make it predictable. That may sound like a small difference, almost practical, but for an ancient civilization, predictability could become sacred. A river that rose and fell, a star that appeared at the edge of dawn, a season that returned when it was supposed to. These were not just useful observations. They were signs that the world had not slipped out of order. And Egypt was a civilization deeply concerned with order. The word often used for this principle is ma'at, truth, balance, justice, proper arrangement, the condition of the world when everything is where it should be. Ma'at was not an abstract slogan hung on a temple wall. It was the fragile state that had to be maintained through kingship, ritual, speech, offering, law, and cosmic rhythm. If the river failed, if the harvest collapsed, if the dead were neglected, if the king was weak, then the world was not simply unlucky. Something in the order of things had trembled. This is why the heavens mattered so intensely. To modernize an ancient temple alignment can seem like a puzzle asking to be solved. Which star? Which sunrise? Which exact angle? The temptation is to treat every structure like a coded message from a lost technical civilization. Sometimes alignments are real and significant. Sometimes they are debated. Sometimes the evidence is thinner than the theory built on top of it. But the broader point remains. Egyptian sacred architecture often cared about direction, horizon, light, and celestial timing because these things carried religious meaning. A temple was not merely a building. It was a machine of attention. It taught the body where to stand, where to look, when to gather, when to make offerings, when the god was honored, when the season turned. Its walls held images and names. Its axis could frame light. Its rituals connected the human world with cycles larger than human desire. In that sense, the temple did not just sit under the sky. It participated in the sky's order. One of the most famous celestial presences in Egyptian life was Sirius, the brilliant star associated with Sopdet, its heliacal rising. Its first visible return in the dawn sky after a period of invisibility became linked with the coming of the Nile flood in Egyptian tradition. The relationship was not a modern scientific equation in the strict sense. The river's behavior depended on distant rains and natural conditions beyond Egypt itself. But culturally, ritually, and calendrically, Sirius became a powerful marker of renewal. Imagine what that meant. For weeks, the land waits. Heat gathers. Fields depend on a flood that no human ruler can command by force. Then, at the edge of morning, a bright star returns, and soon the river's life-giving rise is expected. Whether one is a priest, farmer, scribe, or king, the message is difficult to miss. Heaven and earth appear to be speaking in sequence. This is not superstition in the lazy sense. It is pattern recognition transformed into sacred culture. The Egyptians watched the sky because their world depended on rhythm. They watched the river because survival depended on water. They bound these observations to gods because meaning mattered as much as measurement. A purely technical calendar can tell you when to plant. A sacred calendar tells you why planting belongs to the order of the universe. That difference is crucial. When modern people look back, we often divide knowledge into religion and science, as though ancient observers had to be doing one or the other. But the Egyptian priest watching a star rise before dawn was not choosing between astronomy and theology. He inhabited a world in which careful observation could become ritual truth. The more regular the sky appeared, the more it revealed the presence of order. Even the night itself was organized. Certain stars and star groups helped mark hours of darkness. Celestial patterns were woven into funerary texts and tomb ceilings. The dead traveled through imagined regions of the night sky. Divine boats crossed cosmic waters. The sun's disappearance was not a failure of light, but part of a hidden journey. Darkness had structure. The unseen had geography. That is a remarkably sophisticated idea. It suggests that Egyptian religion did not merely fear the night. It mapped it. It gave the invisible a sequence, a route, a grammar, and by doing so, it made death, time, and cosmic uncertainty less shapeless. Of course, this is also where modern mystery culture finds fertile ground. A star on a ceiling, a shaft pointing upward, a temple facing a horizon. These can be turned into clues in a much larger story about lost visitors, encoded knowledge, or hidden contact. Some interpretations begin with real details. The problem comes when every celestial reference is forced to mean the same thing. The Egyptians did not need to be told that the sky was important by beings from elsewhere. They could see it. They could measure enough of it to build calendars, time rituals, orient monuments, and tie royal theology to celestial permanence. Their achievement becomes smaller, not larger, when we assume they must have borrowed wonder from outsiders. The stronger interpretation is more respectful. The heavens were a living system through which order could be observed, renewed, and dramatized. Stars did not merely decorate the dark. They helped coordinate agriculture, ritual, kingship, and death. They made the universe feel legible, even when it remained terrifyingly beyond control. And this may be why the image of watchers above the Nile feels so fitting. The watchers were not necessarily beings with eyes and bodies. They were the repeating lights, the measured returns, the celestial signs that seemed to keep faith with the world below. Sirius returning, the sun rising, the imperishable stars circling, the horizon receiving and releasing light. Again and again, Egypt saw above it not emptiness, but confirmation. Yet confirmation is not the same as certainty. A star can mark a season without explaining suffering. A temple can align with light without stopping disorder. A calendar can predict a festival without guaranteeing a harvest. The sky gave Egypt a language of order, but it did not remove the anxiety that order might fail. That tension made the rituals necessary. It made the king necessary. It made the gods necessary. Because in Egypt, the heavens did not simply tell people what time it was. They reminded them what kind of world they were trying to preserve. Chapter 6. The Vedic Devas and the Radiant Sky. In ancient India, the sky did not simply hang above the world. It blazed. It thundered. It opened into layers of divine presence, where light, storm, sacrifice, speech, and cosmic law were bound together in a language both luminous and difficult. To enter the Vedic world is to step into a tradition where the heavens are not a distant ceiling, but a living field of power. Radiant, ordered, and often dangerous. The Devas, the shining ones, belong to that field. Their name itself carries the sense of brightness, of beings associated with light and divine force. But even here, we have to be careful. It is tempting to flatten them into a single category. Sky gods, nature gods, ancient astronauts, mythic superheroes, poetic symbols. None of those labels is enough. The Vedic Devas were part of a sacred worldview in which the forces of existence could be addressed, praised, invited, and honored through ritual speech. They were not merely up there. They were present in fire, rain, dawn, wind, moral order, and the hidden relationships that held the cosmos together. Agni, the fire, carried offerings between human beings and gods. Indra, stormy and heroic, fought forces of obstruction and released waters. Varuna was associated with cosmic order, vastness, and moral authority. Surya, the sun, crossed the sky in splendor. Ushas, the dawn, arrived again and again with a beauty that was not decorative, but world-renewing. These figures are not easy to separate into our modern compartments. Are they gods, forces, symbols, persons, powers of nature? In the Vedic imagination, the answer can be yes in several directions at once. That is one reason these texts can feel so mysterious to later readers. They are not written like modern manuals. They are layered with praise, ritual function, memory, metaphor, sound, and theological speculation. A chariot moving through the sky may be an image of the sun. A battle in the heavens may speak to storm, drought, victory, sacrifice, or cosmic renewal. A divine weapon may be both terrifyingly vivid and poetically charged. These are not weak descriptions. They are strong ones, but they operate in a language where image and meaning are inseparable. The Vedic sky is full of motion. Gods ride, winds rush, dawn unveils herself, the sun moves on its path. The storm breaks open the withheld waters. Horses, wheels, chariots, flames, and shining forms appear again and again. It is easy to understand why modern imaginations, trained by engines and aircraft, might look at this imagery and see machines. But the older world saw something more immediate: force given form. A chariot was one of the most powerful images of controlled movement available to ancient poets. It suggested speed, status, warfare, ceremony, and command. To describe a deity in a chariot was not a failure of technical vocabulary. It was a way of saying that divine motion had majesty and force. The image came from a world where horses and wheels already carried enormous symbolic weight. This matters because modern misreadings often begin by assuming ancient metaphor is failed engineering. But metaphor is not a mistake. It is not what people use when they do not understand reality. It is what people use when reality is too large for plain speech. The storm does not merely happen, it charges. The dawn does not merely brighten, she arrives. The sun does not merely move, it travels a path of authority. The ritual fire does not merely burn, it mediates between worlds. In the Vedic worldview, heaven and earth were not sealed apart. They were connected by sacrifice, sound, and order. The spoken hymn mattered. The offering mattered. The correctly performed ritual did not simply express devotion, it participated in maintaining the relationship between human life and cosmic structure. That idea may feel unfamiliar now, but it carries a profound logic. If the world is ordered, then human action should align with that order. Ritual becomes not superstition, but coordination. The Devas, then, are not best understood as visitors who interrupt the world from outside. They are powers within a cosmos already alive with relation. They descend, appear, receive offerings, grant blessings, fight, shine, and withdraw. But all of this takes place inside a sacred structure where visibility and invisibility constantly meet. There are celestial realms in these traditions, yes. There are shining beings, heavenly paths, aerial movement, and cosmic battles. But to leap from that to literal spacecraft is to skip over the very thing that gives the material its power, the religious imagination of a culture that saw no sharp wall between natural force and divine agency. A storm was not just weather. A sunrise was not just light. A ritual fire was not just combustion. To say this is not to make ancient people less intelligent. It is to recognize that intelligence can organize reality differently. The Vedic poets observed the world with precision, but they did not strip it of meaning in order to call that precision knowledge. They sang the world into intelligibility. And perhaps that is the important contrast. Modern space-age readings often search these texts for hardware, vehicles, weapons, engines, evidence of contact. But the older texts are often more concerned with relationship, between humans and gods, sacrifice and order, dawn and renewal, speech and reality, force and restraint. The sky is not mainly a route for travelers. It is a realm of brilliance where power becomes visible. There is mystery here, but not the cheap kind. The mystery lies in how ancient language can hold several truths at once. Indra can be a god of storm, a heroic figure in myth, a recipient of ritual praise, and a symbol of cosmic victory over obstruction. Agni can be physical fire, divine messenger, priestly presence, and transformative energy. The sun can be a celestial body and a sacred being, without contradiction, inside that worldview. Modern readers often demand that one meaning defeat all the others. Ancient poetry is not so obedient. It allows reality to be dense. That density is exactly what made the Vedic sky radiant. It was not empty distance. It was charged with pathways, beings, hymns, powers, and returns. It was a place where the human voice could rise through fire and song toward forces believed to shape existence itself. And as we follow the trail of sky-born divinity across cultures, the Vedic world adds a vital warning. Not every shining chariot is a machine. Not every heavenly battle is a memory of war in space. Sometimes the sky becomes divine because it is the most visible expression of everything human beings cannot master. Light, storm, time, death, fertility, and the unsettling fact that order returns each morning without asking our permission. The Devas belonged to that radiance, and through them, the sky became not a blank above the world, but a vast ceremonial presence, bright enough to guide, powerful enough to terrify, and mysterious enough to be mistaken, much later, for something made of metal. Chapter 7. Vimanas, Memory, and Misreading. The word Vimana has gathered a strange second life. In modern mystery culture, it often appears beside diagrams, engines, weapons, and confident claims about ancient aircraft. You may see it described as proof that people in ancient India remembered machines in the sky. Not metaphorical vehicles, not divine imagery, but engineered craft, perhaps even evidence of a vanished technology. It is a compelling idea. It is also where we have to step carefully, because the Sanskrit traditions that contain aerial palaces, flying chariots, divine vehicles, and celestial journeys are not simple technical reports waiting to be decoded. They are layered works of religion, poetry, epic imagination, ritual memory, royal ideology, and later storytelling. They grew across time. They were copied, interpreted, expanded, and reimagined. To pull one luminous image out of that long tradition and treat it like a blueprint is not investigation. It is extraction. And extraction can make almost anything look like evidence. A palace in the sky becomes a craft. A divine chariot becomes an aircraft. A weapon blazing with unbearable light becomes a missile. A heavenly journey becomes an interplanetary flight. The method feels exciting because it lets the modern reader translate ancient wonder into modern machinery. But the danger is that the translation begins to erase the culture that created the image in the first place. A Vimana, depending on context, may refer to a palace, a shrine, a celestial vehicle, or an elevated structure. The meaning is not frozen in one mechanical shape. In epic and mythological literature, flying or radiant vehicles can signal divine status, royal splendor, supernatural power, or movement between realms. They belong to a world where gods, sages, kings, demons, and cosmic beings do not move through reality by ordinary human limits. That does not make the imagery meaningless. It makes it mythic. And mythic language has its own precision. When a text describes a radiant aerial vehicle, it may be telling the listener that a figure is not bound to the ground like ordinary mortals. When a heavenly palace appears, it may be expressing rank, merit, cosmic reward, or divine presence. When gods ride through the sky, the point may be less about the mechanics of flight and more about the hierarchy of worlds. Modern people sometimes underestimate this because we live after the airplane. Once flight becomes technological, we start seeing technology backward into every older image of flight. Wings, chariots, sky roads, radiant wheels, cloud palaces, all begin to look like attempts to describe machines without the proper vocabulary. But that assumption quietly insults the ancient author. It imagines the poet as someone who almost knew what an aircraft was, instead of someone doing something different altogether. The ancient poet was not failing to write engineering. He was succeeding at building a cosmos. This does not mean every mystery disappears. Some descriptions are vivid. Some stories feel oddly concrete. Some later texts develop elaborate accounts that modern readers naturally find intriguing. But vividness is not proof of machinery. Human imagination has always been capable of technical detail in fantasy, ritual, and sacred literature. A dream can have architecture. A myth can have moving parts. A heavenly weapon can be described with terrifying specificity because fear itself sharpens description. The important question is not whether ancient people could imagine flight. Of course they could. Birds were flying above them every day. Clouds moved. Storms crossed the horizon. Smoke rose. Sparks climbed into darkness. The sun traveled. The moon traveled. Stars wheeled overhead. Human beings did not need engines to imagine the desire to leave the ground. They needed eyes, longing, and the knowledge that the sky was the one realm they could see but not enter. That longing is ancient. And in many traditions, the sky became the natural stage for beings more powerful than humans. If a god is not limited like us, then the god moves where we cannot. If a king is glorified beyond ordinary kings, then he may ride in a vehicle no earthly stable could hold. If a sage ascends through merit or divine favor, the journey must cross the visible boundary between human dust and celestial brilliance. The mistake comes when we treat that boundary as aerospace. There is another complication. Not all material associated with Vimanas belongs to the same period or carries the same authority. Later writings, retellings, and modern claims can become tangled together until the public imagination no longer knows what is ancient, what is medieval, what is colonial era interpretation, and what is modern invention. Mystery culture often thrives in that confusion. It presents the tradition as a single locked vault, then claims to possess the key. A more careful reading is slower. It asks where a passage comes from. It asks what genre it belongs to. It asks whether the language is poetic, ritual, epic, theological, or technical. It asks how a term is used elsewhere. It asks what the surrounding story is doing. It asks what the original audience might have understood before modern machines changed the shape of our imagination. That last point may be the most important. Ancient texts do not arrive to us untouched. We read them through the age we inhabit. A person living after rockets may see rockets. A person living after cinema may see cinematic scenes. A person living after industrial war may see advanced weapons. This does not mean the reader is foolish. It means the reader is human. We all carry our century into the past. The ancient astronaut interpretation of Vimanas is powerful because it gives old stories a modern thrill. It suggests that myth is not symbolic memory, but hidden history. It flatters us with the idea that our technologies were anticipated, witnessed, or even inherited from something older and greater. It turns sacred literature into a treasure map. But the treasure may not be where that reading looks. The real treasure is the complexity of imagination itself. The ability of a culture to picture multiple worlds, radiant beings, divine movement, moral order, cosmic conflict, and human aspiration in images that still burn brightly after centuries. To reduce that to engines and metal is not to make the story bigger. It may make it smaller. Still, the modern fascination is revealing. We keep returning to Vimanas because they sit at the crossing point between two kinds of awe. Ancient awe looked upward and saw divinity, hierarchy, and cosmic order. Modern awe looks upward and sees planets, spacecraft, and the possibility of life beyond Earth. When these two forms of awe meet, sparks fly. Sometimes they illuminate, sometimes they blind. The careful path is not to mock the mystery, but to refuse the shortcut. Yes, ancient Indian literature contains extraordinary images of movement through the sky. Yes, those images have inspired generations of speculation. But what we can say with more confidence is that they belong first to sacred and mythological worlds, where flight is a language of power, not automatically a record of machines. The sky in these texts is not empty, but neither is every shining form in it made of metal. Between memory and misreading lies the difficult work of interpretation. And in that space, the Vimana remains fascinating, not because it proves a lost aerospace program, but because it shows how easily human wonder can change costumes when it travels from one age into another. Chapter 8. The Greek Gods on Olympus and Beyond. In Greece, the gods lived close enough to quarrel. That is part of what makes them feel so different from the vast, divine assemblies of Mesopotamia or the radiant ritual powers of the Vedic world. Greek gods could be magnificent, terrifying, petty, beautiful, cruel, generous, jealous, and strangely familiar. They walked through stories with recognizable emotions, but they were never merely human. Their home was above ordinary life, and their authority reached into the visible heavens. Olympus was a mountain, but it was also more than a mountain. It gave divinity a height that could be imagined, not a distant galaxy, not an abstract theological realm beyond all perception. A summit, a place above weather and cities, above fields and graves, where the immortals could feast, argue, watch, desire, and decide. The gods were elevated, but not unreachable in the imagination. They were close enough for poets to describe, and high enough for mortals to fear. At the center stood Zeus. He was not simply a thunder god throwing storms for dramatic effect. Thunder, in a world without electrical theory, was one of the most overwhelming signs of power imaginable. It arrived from above, without warning, with light that split the sky and sound that shook the body. To associate supreme authority with thunder was not arbitrary. It was a way of saying that kingship itself had a vertical force. Power descended, judgment struck, the sky could speak with violence. Zeus ruled from above, but his rule was not clean or peaceful. Greek myth rarely offers a universe without tension. Divine authority is constantly entangled with desire, insult, oath, punishment, and rivalry. The gods enforce order, yet they also disturb it. They protect cities, yet they can destroy. They represent cosmic power, yet their stories remain full of appetite and contradiction. That contradiction is not a flaw in the mythology. It may be one reason the myths survived so strongly. The Greeks did not make their gods morally tidy. They made them memorable. In doing so, they gave divine power a personality, and personality always carries danger. A storm with a name is no longer just weather. It is a will. A plague is not only disease. It may be the anger of Apollo. A calm sea is not only favorable conditions. It may be permission from powers beneath and above the horizon. Apollo is especially revealing here. He is often remembered as a god of music, prophecy, healing, plague, archery, and later strongly associated with the sun. That range can seem scattered to modern readers, as if one god had collected too many functions. But in mythic thought, these connections can form a pattern. Light reveals. Prophecy reveals. Music orders sound. Healing restores balance. Plague disrupts it. The arrow strikes from a distance, like light, like disease, like divine will. The gods do not always fit into neat modern categories because they were not designed for filing cabinets. Helios, the sun, gives us a more direct celestial figure. He crosses the sky, seeing much from above, a witness to human and divine actions. Selene, the moon, carries a different kind of presence, cooler, nocturnal, associated with beauty, rhythm, and the mystery of night. These beings are not just decorations added to the sky. They give the heavens character. They make celestial movement narratable. To say the sun travels is observation. To say Helios drives across the sky is interpretation. And interpretation is where culture begins to reveal itself. The Greeks saw the same sun that every people saw, but they gave it form according to their own poetic and religious imagination. A moving light became a divine traveler. A recurring dawn became the opening of another day under watchful powers. The heavens were visible order, but also visible story. This is why the Greek world matters in the larger pattern. It shows how easily the sky becomes both stage and authority. The gods are above the earth, but they are also within the world's forces. Storm, light, prophecy, desire, disease, victory, punishment, and beauty. Heaven is not simply a place where gods live. It is the direction from which meaning descends. And yet, Greek religion also complicates the idea of sky gods as a single type. Not all divine power is celestial. Poseidon belongs to the sea and earthquake. Hades rules the underworld. Demeter carries the grief and renewal of the grain. Dionysus dissolves boundaries with wine, madness, theater, and ecstasy. The Greek cosmos is distributed. Power rises from below, surges from the sea, grows from the soil, burns in the sun, and crashes from the clouds. Still, the highest authority often keeps its throne above. That matters because height is never just physical. A throne above the world suggests oversight. It suggests superiority. It suggests the ability to see what mortals cannot. The mountaintop, like the temple tower or the starry afterlife, becomes a symbol of distance and command. Human beings imagine power vertically because the body experiences power vertically. We look up at storms. We look up at mountains. We look up at rulers seated above us. We look up at the dead imagined among stars. Greek myth understood that instinct very well, but it did not leave the heavens calm. The sky was full of conflict, motion, pursuit, punishment, and transformation. Figures became constellations. Heroes were remembered among stars. Gods crossed the visible world with signs and interventions. The boundary between mythic story and celestial order was porous. What appeared above could be both astronomical and narrative. A constellation could be a pattern of stars and a preserved drama at the same time. Again, the modern temptation is to ask whether these stories encode literal events. Did the gods descend? Did a shining being cross the sky? Did ancient people witness something extraordinary and turn it into mythology? Possibly, in some cases, unusual natural events may have fed stories. Comets, meteors, eclipses, storms, and strange lights have always impressed human observers. But the enduring Greek pattern does not require spacecraft to make sense. It grows from the meeting of visible nature, political imagination, ritual practice, and poetic genius. The sky was not only observed, it was dramatized. And once dramatized, it could hold memory in a powerful way. The Greeks did not merely chart the heavens, they populated them with consequence. The sun could see, the moon could desire, thunder could judge. A god of prophecy could make the future feel like light arriving before dawn. That may be why Greek mythology still feels so alive. Its gods are not remote principles. They are personalities moving through a charged universe, where the heavens are bright with intelligence but never entirely safe. Olympus, then, is not an alien base hidden behind clouds. It is something more revealing, a human attempt to imagine power with a face, authority with a voice, and the sky as a court from which beauty and disaster might descend in the same breath. Chapter 9. When planets became gods, some lights remain fixed, others wander. To ancient sky watchers, that difference was not a small technical detail. It was a revelation. Most stars held their places in the great pattern of night, rising and setting with dependable rhythm. But a few bright points moved differently. They slipped against the background. They appeared, vanished, returned, reversed, brightened, dimmed. They behaved less like decorations and more like agents. The planets seemed alive. That word, planet, comes from the idea of wandering. But to call them wanderers is not to call them lost. In many ancient traditions, their motion felt purposeful, even if difficult to understand. They did not scatter randomly. They followed strange paths with recognizable cycles. They were irregular enough to provoke awe, but regular enough to be studied. That combination, mystery with pattern, is one of the most powerful engines of religion. Mesopotamia was one of the great centers of this celestial thinking. The movements of planets, stars, eclipses, and other phenomena were carefully observed and interpreted as signs. The sky was not treated as mute. It could be read, and what it revealed was not merely weather or season, but the intentions of divine powers toward kingdoms, rulers, wars, harvests, and human fate. A bright planet was not just a planet. It could be the visible form, symbol, or domain of a god. Venus, for example, became associated in Mesopotamia with Inanna and later Ishtar, a deity of love, war, sexuality, and power, whose character is far too complex to reduce to one gentle meaning. Venus itself helps explain the force of the association. It can appear as morning star or evening star, brilliant and commanding, close to sunrise or sunset, occupying thresholds. It is beautiful, but not soft. It announces itself at the edge of light. A modern astronomer can explain the orbit. An ancient priest could see a goddess. Those two responses are not as opposed as they first seem. Both begin with attention. Both begin with the refusal to ignore the moving light. The difference is what kind of meaning each age is trained to seek. Modern astronomy asks what the object is made of, how it moves, how far away it is. Ancient celestial religion asked what it meant for the world below. The Romans and Greeks also tied planets to divine figures, though the relationships shifted across time and culture. Mars became linked with war, Jupiter with supreme authority, Saturn with older, heavier powers of time, agriculture, and boundary. Mercury with swiftness, messages, and crossing. The sky became a visible map of divine personalities in motion. This was not merely storytelling. It shaped calendars, ritual timing, political decisions, omens, and eventually, the long development of astrology. The belief that celestial bodies influenced human affairs did not emerge because ancient people were careless observers. It emerged because they were careful enough to see that earthly life already depended on heavenly cycles. The sun governed day and year. The moon shaped months and tides. Seasonal stars helped organize agriculture and navigation. From there, it was not a wild leap to imagine that the wandering planets also carried influence. The sky already mattered. The planets made it personal. Their movements seemed too strange to be dismissed and too ordered to be meaningless. When Mars reddened in the night, when Venus blazed near the horizon, when Jupiter shone with steady grandeur, the heavens appeared to be populated by powers with temperament. Some were swift, some were slow, some were bright enough to command attention even in twilight. Some disappeared for long stretches, then returned like rulers from exile. This is where the ancient imagination shows its discipline. It did not simply invent gods and throw them onto the sky. It watched behavior. It noticed character in motion. Brightness, color, speed, timing, direction, disappearance, return. All of these could become part of a planet's sacred identity. The interpretation was mythological, but the foundation was observational. And that gives the ancient planet gods their special tension. They are both seen and unseen. The light is visible, but the power behind it is interpreted. The cycle can be measured, but the meaning remains open. The planet moves according to a pattern, yet its pattern is strange enough to suggest will. It is not surprising that people read destiny there. Human life is full of movements we only partly control. Birth, illness, love, victory, aging, death. The planets offered a grander version of that experience, motion governed by laws hidden just beyond the mind's reach. This is also why the idea of gods from the stars can become misleading. In many ancient systems, the gods are not necessarily imagined as biological beings traveling from one planet to another. Instead, the planets themselves are woven into divine language. A moving light can be a sign of a god, the body of a god, the star of a god, or the visible expression of a divine power. The relationship is symbolic, theological, and observational all at once. Modern readers often want to separate those layers. Ancient cultures often allowed them to overlap. A planet could be a physical light in the sky, a mathematical object of prediction, a religious sign, a divine presence, and a force of fate. None of these meanings had to cancel the others. The modern habit of asking, "Which one is it really?" may tell us more about our age than theirs. There is something humbling in that. We have better instruments. We know the planets are worlds, not pinholes in a divine curtain. We have sent machines to photograph them, orbit them, land on them, sample them. We have turned wandering lights into landscapes of ice, dust, storms, rock, and atmosphere. And yet, in a strange way, the ancient intuition was not entirely wrong. The planets are not alive in the old religious sense, but they do shape us. Their motions helped shape calendars, navigation, agriculture, mathematics, mythology, and timekeeping. Their visibility shaped the imagination of civilizations. Their names still live in our weekdays, our languages, our symbols, our stories of personality and fate. Even stripped of divine bodies, they continue to move through human culture. The wandering gods never quite left. They changed vocabulary. And this may be one of the quiet reasons ancient astronaut theories find such fertile ground here. The planets are actual worlds. The gods were associated with planets. Modern people know worlds can be traveled to, at least in principle. So the old sacred connection becomes easy to reinterpret as physical origin. If Venus belongs to a goddess, perhaps the goddess came from Venus. If the sky contains divine beings, perhaps those beings were visitors from space. But that is a modern bridge, built from modern materials. The ancient bridge was different. It ran from observation to meaning, from meaning to ritual, from ritual to social order, from social order back to the sky. It did not need engines to be powerful. It needed repetition, brightness, uncertainty, and the deeply human suspicion that what moves above us may know something about what happens below. When planets became gods, the heavens became crowded in a new way. Not crowded with spacecraft, crowded with intention. And for thousands of years, those wandering lights taught human beings to imagine destiny as something written not on paper, not in law, not in blood alone, but in the slow, brilliant movement of the sky itself. Chapter 10. Mesoamerica and the Blood of the Cosmos. In Mesoamerica, time had teeth. It did not simply pass. It demanded attention. It returned in cycles, gathered pressure, opened dangerous windows, and bound kings, farmers, priests, warriors, and gods into a universe where the calendar was never just a calendar. The sky was not a distant ceiling above Maya and Aztec worlds. It was a working system of signs. The sun rose and disappeared. The moon changed shape. Venus burned in the morning or evening sky with a brilliance that could feel almost aggressive. Eclipses unsettled the order of things. Seasons turned. Rains came or failed. And beneath all of it, human communities tried to live in rhythm with forces they did not control. This is one of the places where the modern mind has to slow down. When we hear that celestial cycles shaped sacrifice, kingship, prophecy, and war, it is easy to imagine a civilization ruled by fear alone. But fear is only part of the picture. Mesoamerican astronomy was also discipline. It required generations of watching, recording, comparing, correcting, remembering. The heavens mattered because their patterns could be tracked, and because those patterns were believed to touch the fate of cities. Among the Maya, astronomical observation became part of a larger intellectual world that included writing, mathematics, ritual, dynastic history, and sacred time. Their calendars did not merely count days in a practical sense. They located human action inside repeating structures of meaning. A ruler's accession, a dedication, a battle, a ritual performance. These could be tied to dates that linked the present with mythic time and cosmic recurrence. That is a very different way of experiencing history. Modern people often imagine time as a road. We move forward, leaving the past behind us. In many Mesoamerican traditions, time could behave more like a wheel with memory. A day was not an empty container waiting for events. It had character. It belonged to a pattern. It could echo earlier sacred moments. To act at the right time was to align human power with cosmic order. The Maya were especially attentive to Venus. The planet's cycles were watched closely, and in some contexts, Venus was associated with warfare, omen, and dangerous timing. This makes intuitive sense when you consider the planet itself. Venus does not glow gently from some anonymous corner of the night. It appears suddenly powerful near the horizon, often close to dawn or dusk, those unstable thresholds between darkness and light. It vanishes, returns, changes role from evening star to morning star. It behaves like a celestial actor entering from different doors. For ancient observers, that behavior invited interpretation. A bright wandering light that appears before sunrise can feel like a herald. A planet that disappears and returns can suggest death and reemergence. A cycle precise enough to be predicted, but strange enough to unsettle, can become a perfect carrier of divine force. In the Aztec world, the sun held an even more urgent place in cosmic imagination. The sun was not merely a lamp in the sky. It was bound to stories of creation, struggle, nourishment, and continuation. The world existed under conditions that required maintenance. Human life was not separate from the gods' labor. Ritual action, including sacrifice, was understood by those who practiced it within a sacred economy of debt and renewal. This is difficult territory, and it should be handled without either romanticizing or sneering. Human sacrifice was real, and it was violent. But if we reduce it to savagery, we stop understanding the civilization that practiced it. If we turn away from its brutality, we also fail. The harder task is to see the religious logic without pretending it was gentle. Blood, in these traditions, could be imagined as a life force offered back into a cosmos that had first given life to human beings. The phrase, blood of the cosmos, is not merely dramatic. It points to a worldview in which the human body participated in cosmic maintenance. To modern ears, that can sound horrifying. It was, but it was also meaningful to the people who built the ritual systems around it. Meaning does not make violence harmless. It makes violence historically intelligible. That distinction matters. The Mesoamerican sky was not passive. It was tied to hunger, renewal, danger, and obligation. The sun needed to continue. The rains needed to return. Maize needed to grow. Kings needed legitimacy. Communities needed assurance that the world would not collapse into disorder. Celestial precision did not remove anxiety. In some ways, it sharpened it. If the cycles were known, then failing to honor them became more frightening. This is one reason prophecy and calendar systems held such authority. To predict an eclipse, a Venus phase, or a meaningful date was not simply to perform a technical feat. It was to stand near the machinery of fate. Priests and scribes who understood sacred time could advise rulers, frame political events, and interpret danger. Knowledge of the sky became knowledge of power. And once again, we find the familiar pattern. Heaven is not empty. It is filled with signs, beings, cycles, and warnings. Divine power descends not necessarily as bodies from other planets, but as timing, omen, heat, rain, light, and terror. A king's authority is strengthened by alignment with cosmic order. A ritual is made meaningful by its place in the calendar. A war may be tied to the behavior of Venus. A city's future may be read in the sky. What makes Mesoamerica distinct is the severity of the bargain. In Egypt, the stars could promise endurance after death. In Greece, the heavens were dramatized by divine personalities. In the Vedic world, the sky blazed with ritual brightness. In Mesoamerica, the sky often appears as a demanding ledger. It remembers. It repeats. It requires repayment. That does not mean every culture in the region thought the same way, or that every ritual had one simple explanation. Mesoamerica contains many peoples, languages, cities, and centuries. Maya and Aztec traditions should not be flattened into one system. The evidence varies. Some interpretations remain debated, and much of what is popularly imagined has been shaped by later retellings, colonial accounts, fragmentary records, and modern fascination. Still, the broad pattern is strong enough to matter. Celestial cycles shaped political and religious life. The movements of the sun, moon, and Venus were not background astronomy. They were woven into the way societies understood legitimacy, danger, renewal, and time itself. The calendar was not just a tool, it was a sacred architecture. And perhaps this is why the Mesoamerican case feels so intense. Here, the sky is not mainly a home of distant gods looking down in calm majesty. It is a clock that bleeds into history. It tells rulers when to act, priests when to warn, farmers when to hope, and communities when the fragile order of the world must be fed again. To call that primitive would be lazy. To call it simple would be false. It was a profound, disciplined, and sometimes terrifying way of binding human life to the cosmos. The people who built these systems were not staring upward in confusion. They were reading the sky with extraordinary seriousness, because for them, the heavens did not merely shine, they kept score. Chapter 11. Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, and the Serpent from the sky. A serpent should belong to the earth. It moves close to the ground, through grass, stone, heat, and shadow. It has no wings. It does not sing like a bird or shine like a star. Its power is low, silent, sudden, and yet, across parts of Mesoamerica, one of the most enduring divine images joined the serpent to feathers, the creature of the soil fused with the creature of the sky. That combination is not random. The feathered serpent is a bridge, known in different traditions and contexts by names such as Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan. The figure carries meanings that shift across time and region. It can be associated with wind, rain, fertility, rulership, priestly knowledge, creation, Venus, and the movement between worlds. But the most important thing to understand is that the feathered serpent is not a single simple character whose meaning can be pinned down once and for all. Like many ancient symbols, it lived many lives. In the hands of modern mystery culture, Quetzalcoatl is often turned into something much narrower: a visitor from the sky, a bearded teacher from across the sea, an extraterrestrial lawgiver, a memory of contact misremembered as religion. These versions can be dramatic, and they are easy to package. A god descends. He teaches. He departs. He promises to return. The shape is irresistible, but irresistible stories are not always reliable ones. The evidence behind many of the more sensational claims is tangled with later retellings, colonial interpretations, mistranslation, political myth-making, and the human desire to turn symbolic descent into literal arrival. The feathered serpent does not need to be an alien to be extraordinary. In fact, the alien version often makes the symbol smaller by forcing it to answer a modern question. It was not created to answer. What does it mean to join serpent and bird? It means the boundary between lower and upper worlds has been crossed. The serpent touches earth, caves, water, fertility, danger, and renewal. It sheds its skin, and so it easily becomes a sign of transformation. Feathers belong to birds, to flight, to the sky, to status, to sacred ornament, and to the rare materials that marked authority. Put them together, and the result is not a biological report. It is a statement of connection. Earth rising toward heaven, heaven descending toward earth, a power that moves between realms. That is why the feathered serpent fits so naturally into a world where cosmic order mattered so deeply. Rain must come from above, but it must enter the soil. Maize grows from earth, but depends on celestial timing. Kings rule on the ground, but require legitimacy that reaches beyond ordinary human force. Knowledge is spoken by people, but it may be framed as descending from divine sources. The feathered serpent can hold all of these tensions at once. Kukulkan, especially associated with Maya tradition, is often discussed in connection with architecture and celestial symbolism, particularly because of the famous serpent shadow effect observed at Chichen Itza. Here again, caution is useful. Modern audiences love the image because it looks like proof that stone, sunlight, and myth were perfectly united. And in a broad sense, it does show how architecture could dramatize cosmic meaning. But we should be careful not to turn every striking visual effect into a secret technology or a message from beyond the planet. Ancient builders were capable of careful observation. They were also capable of theater. Sacred theater is not fake. It is ritual intelligence made visible. A shadow moving along a staircase at a significant time can teach a community what a text might teach another culture. It can make the sky seem to write briefly upon stone. It can turn a building into an event. That may be the better way to understand these traditions. Not as primitive reports of misunderstood machines, but as highly developed systems of meaning in which the sky, the earth, the calendar, the ruler, and the god all participate in the same drama. The serpent from the sky is not necessarily a creature arriving from another world. It is the image of connection itself. And this matters because symbols survive by being flexible. Quetzalcoatl could be remembered differently by different peoples and at different times. A priestly figure, a wind god, a creator, a culture hero, a Venus-linked power, a symbol of rulership. None of these meanings completely erases the others. They accumulate. They overlap. They are reinterpreted when political needs change, when empires rise, when cities fall, when conquerors arrive, and when later writers try to make sense of what remains. This is where the story becomes especially fragile. After European contact, indigenous traditions were recorded through filters. Missionaries, chroniclers, translators, conquerors, native informants working under pressure, and later historians trying to construct a damaged past. Some accounts may preserve valuable memory. Others may reflect misunderstanding, adaptation, or deliberate reshaping. When modern theories confidently quote these traditions as if they were untouched transcripts from antiquity, they often ignore the complicated route by which the material reached us. The feathered serpent traveled through history, It did not arrive in our books unchanged. That does not make it meaningless. It makes it more interesting and more difficult. The figure became a place where many kinds of meaning could gather. Wind that precedes rain. Venus that appears and disappears. Wisdom that descends from divine order. Rulership that needs cosmic sanction. And transformation that begins in the body of the earth but reaches upward. The serpent's body is important because it never fully leaves the ground. Even with feathers, it remains a creature of contact. It does not become a pure bird. It does not abandon earth for heaven. It links them. That may be why the symbol carries such force. Human beings live between those two directions. We plant in soil and pray towards sky. We bury the dead below and imagine the divine above. We fear what crawls and worship what flies. The feathered serpent holds that contradiction in one form. And so, when people ask whether Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan proves a visitation from the stars, the more honest answer is that the evidence does not support that leap. What it does support is something subtler. A profound symbolic system in which descent from the sky could mean rain, knowledge, authority, fertility, celestial timing, or divine presence. It could mean that the cosmos was not divided into mute pieces, but joined by living relationships. The modern alien reading offers a clean picture. The ancient symbol offers a richer one. It tells us that heaven and earth were not separate zones on a map. They were partners in the survival of the world. The sky sent rain. The earth answered with maize. The calendar shaped ritual. The ruler stood between community and cosmos. The serpent moved below. The feathers lifted above. And in that impossible creature, ancient Mesoamerica gave form to a truth many cultures felt in different ways. The sacred does not always stay where we expect it. Sometimes it crawls. Sometimes it flies. Sometimes it becomes most powerful at the exact point where the two meet. Chapter 12. The Dogon Sirius and the Problem of Modern Legend. Some mysteries begin in ancient temples. Others begin in books. The story of the Dogon and Sirius belongs uneasily to both worlds, or rather, to the space between them. It is often told as one of the most tantalizing claims in the whole ancient astronaut tradition, that the Dogon people of Mali possessed detailed knowledge of Sirius, including ideas about a hidden companion star, long before modern astronomy could have reached them. On the surface, it sounds astonishing. A remote people, a sacred star, knowledge apparently too advanced for its time, a hidden astronomical truth preserved through myth. It has all the elements of a perfect modern mystery, and that is exactly why we have to be cautious. The Dogon are real. Their traditions are real. Their ritual life, art, cosmology, and social organization have been studied by anthropologists, though never without difficulty, because no outside observer enters another culture without bringing assumptions. But the famous Sirius claims are not a simple window into untouched ancient knowledge. They are part of a complicated modern story involving fieldwork, interpretation, colonial context, later popularization, and the hunger for evidence that humanity may once have received knowledge from beyond the earth. The most familiar version says that Dogon cosmology included knowledge of Sirius B, the faint companion star to Sirius, invisible to the naked eye and known to modern astronomy through telescopic observation and calculation. Some versions go further, suggesting knowledge of orbital periods, density, or even additional celestial bodies. In ancient astronaut literature, this becomes a kind of smoking gun. How could such knowledge exist unless someone taught it? But the question may be built on unstable ground. The evidence is disputed. Some later researchers questioned whether the Dogon traditions had been accurately recorded or interpreted. Others raised the possibility that astronomical information could have entered the community through contact with outsiders, missionaries, colonial officials, travelers, teachers, or earlier conversations with people already aware of modern astronomy. There is also the problem of translation. Sacred language, symbolic description, and outsider interpretation can distort one another very quickly. A small misunderstanding can grow into a cosmic revelation. That does not mean anyone involved was necessarily lying. The more interesting possibility is subtler. Anthropological work often depends on conversations across enormous cultural distance. A researcher asks a question. An informant answers within one framework of meaning. The researcher hears the answer through another. Later readers simplify the report further. Popular writers remove the caution. Television adds music, stars, and a pause before the commercial break. By the time the story reaches the public imagination, uncertainty has been polished into certainty. The Dogon Sirius legend shows how modern myth is made. Not ancient myth, modern myth. It begins with fragments that may be meaningful, ambiguous, or poorly understood. It passes through academic interpretation. Then it is lifted into mystery culture, where every doubt becomes part of the drama. If scholars question the claim, that questioning can be framed as suppression. If evidence is thin, thinness becomes proof that something has been hidden. The legend becomes almost impossible to weaken, because it feeds on resistance. That is one reason this case matters so much. It teaches us that not every ancient mystery is equally ancient. Some are modern constructions built around ancient or traditional material. They may use real peoples, real symbols, and real ritual language, but the form in which the public receives them can be shaped largely by 20th century concerns. The rise of space exploration, distrust of institutions, fascination with lost knowledge, and the desire to find evidence that modern science was somehow anticipated by sacred tradition. The Dogon deserve better than being treated as a prop in someone else's theory. Their culture is not valuable only if it contains a hidden astronomy lesson. Their mythology does not become impressive only if it predicts telescope science. A people's cosmology can be profound without secretly encoding astrophysics. In fact, insisting that its worth depends on modern scientific confirmation may be another form of disrespect disguised as admiration. This pattern appears again and again. A sacred tradition is noticed because it resembles something modern. A mythic image is treated as a failed technical description. A symbolic structure is judged interesting only when it can be translated into physics, machinery, astronomy, or alien contact. The old meaning is pushed aside, and the modern audience congratulates itself for finding the real meaning underneath. But what if the real meaning was not hidden underneath? What if it was already there? In ritual, social memory, cosmological imagination, and the way a community located itself within the world. Sirius, after all, is not an ordinary star in human history. It is one of the brightest stars in the night sky. Many cultures noticed it. It became important in Egypt. It served as a marker, a sign, a seasonal presence, a point of brilliance that naturally attracted story and attention. There is nothing strange about a people caring deeply about Sirius. The strange part is the modern claim that their knowledge must have included details unavailable without advanced astronomy, and that claim remains uncertain. What we can say with more confidence is that the Dogon Sirius story reveals the dangers of a particular kind of argument. It takes a disputed report, treats it as firm evidence, uses it to imply an extraordinary conclusion, and then allows the conclusion to make the original report seem even more important. The logic becomes circular. The story feels convincing because it has been repeated so often in the same dramatic shape. A remote tribe knew about an invisible star. Therefore, someone must have told them. Therefore, the tradition proves contact. But each step needs evidence, and each step is weaker than the legend usually admits. There is also an uncomfortable history behind the word remote. It often means remote from the person telling the story. It can make a living culture sound sealed away from the world, untouched by exchange, conversation, education, colonial disruption, or modern influence. In reality, human communities are rarely as isolated as mystery narratives need them to be. Ideas travel, people travel, questions travel. Even the assumption that a tradition is pure because it is non-Western can be misleading. Purity is often something outsiders imagine. Cultures are alive. They borrow, adapt, conceal, reveal, negotiate, and reinterpret. A cosmology recorded in the 20th century may contain old elements, recent elements, responses to outsiders, and meanings that shift depending on who is asking. That does not make it false. It makes it human. So the Dogon Sirius case does not close the door on wonder. It changes the kind of wonder we should be paying attention to. Instead of asking only whether the Dogon preserved a message from star visitors, we might ask how a story about them became so useful to modern people. Why did this claim travel so far? Why was it repeated with such confidence? Why did the idea of hidden star knowledge feel more exciting than the difficult, respectful work of understanding Dogon culture on its own terms? Perhaps because the story flatters a modern longing. We want the universe to have reached down. We want ancient peoples to possess proof that we are not alone. We want the brightest star in the sky to be more than beautiful. We want it to be a clue. And when a tradition appears to offer that clue, we may stop listening carefully. That is the quiet warning of Sirius. A star can be real. A tradition can be real. A mystery can be real. And still, the story built around them can be partly modern invention. The sky above the Dogon, like the sky above Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, Greece, and Mesoamerica, was never empty of meaning. But meaning is not the same as evidence of visitation. Sometimes the most revealing thing is not what ancient people supposedly knew, but what modern people so badly want them to have known. Chapter 13. Star Gods or Sky Language. By now, the pattern is difficult to ignore. Again and again, across cultures separated by deserts, oceans, mountains, languages, and centuries, human beings placed their highest powers above them. Gods descended from the sky. Kings received authority from heaven. The dead rose toward stars. Planets became divine bodies. Calendars became sacred. Serpents grew feathers. Chariots crossed the upper world. The brightest lights of night were treated not as scenery, but as signs. It is tempting to draw one straight line through all of it. One answer, one origin, one hidden event behind every myth. That temptation is powerful because patterns feel like evidence. When stories echo across distant places, we instinctively ask whether they share a common source. Perhaps everyone remembered the same visitors. Perhaps the gods came from the stars, appeared to different peoples in different forms, and left behind religious fragments of a forgotten encounter. It is a dramatic possibility, but there is another possibility, quieter and perhaps more revealing. Maybe the sky became sacred everywhere because every human being lives beneath it. The sky is the one great presence no culture had to borrow. It was there before writing, before empire, before agriculture, before kingship. It covered hunters, farmers, priests, sailors, mourners, and children. It brought rain, withheld rain, burned crops, cooled nights, marked seasons, guided travel, and displayed lights no hand could reach. It was both familiar and untouchable. It returned every day, but never became ordinary. That alone may explain more than we think. A society that depends on crops will watch the heavens because seasons matter. A society that buries its dead will look upward because the stars appear deathless. A ruler seeking legitimacy will borrow height because height suggests command. A priest will read the sky because its patterns seem older and steadier than human law. A poet will populate the heavens because emptiness is hard for the human mind to leave alone. We do not tolerate a meaningless sky very well. This is not an argument against mystery. It is an argument for a deeper kind of mystery. The question is not only whether something came down. The question is why descent itself feels sacred. Why do we imagine truth arriving from above? Why does the direction upward carry hope, fear, authority, and judgment? Why do we still speak of higher wisdom, lofty ideals, falling from grace and rising after death? The language remains, even when the old gods have faded. That may be the clue. What ancient myths reveal is not simply a set of claims about the sky. They reveal the architecture of human meaning. Above us are the things we cannot touch. Below us are the dead, the soil, the hidden roots, the buried past. Around us is daily life. It is almost inevitable that the mind begins to arrange existence vertically. The cosmos becomes a house with floors. Gods belong above. Ancestors belong below. Humans live in the middle, anxious and interpretive. From that middle place, the sky becomes a screen for everything too large to hold. Order, fate, weather, kingship, memory, death, return. The trouble begins when modern readers treat this shared sky language as if it must have one literal explanation. Similar symbols do not always mean identical events. Serpents appear in many cultures not because one serpent cult secretly ruled the planet, but because snakes are powerful animals that human beings repeatedly noticed. Flood myths appear widely not only because one flood story spread everywhere, but because floods happen, rivers rise, coastlines drown, and water is both life and disaster. The sky works the same way. Every culture had access to it. Every culture had reason to fear it. Every culture had reason to study it. Every culture had reason to turn it into story. And yet, we should not swing too far in the other direction. To say that sky gods are a human pattern does not mean all traditions are interchangeable. The Anunnaki are not the same as the Egyptian imperishable stars. The Vedic Devas are not Greek Olympians wearing different names. Quetzalcoatl is not Zeus with feathers. Dogon cosmology is not a footnote to Mesopotamia. Each tradition has its own history, language, politics, rituals, and internal logic. The pattern matters. The differences matter more. This is where careful interpretation has to resist two lazy habits at once. The first lazy habit says, they all describe aliens. The second says, they are all just primitive explanations of nature. Both flatten the past. Both make ancient people smaller than they were. One turns them into confused witnesses of technology. The other turns them into simple-minded observers inventing stories because they lacked science. Neither is generous enough. Ancient people were capable of observation and imagination at the same time. They could notice real celestial cycles and interpret them through ritual. They could build monuments aligned to horizons and also fill those horizons with divine meaning. They could use myth not as a poor substitute for knowledge, but as a way of placing knowledge inside a world of value. That is why the sky language survived. It did work that numbers alone could not do. It told people when to plant, but also why planting mattered. It helped rulers claim authority, but also reminded them that authority came from beyond ordinary force. It gave the dead a path, the living a calendar, the city a center, and suffering a place inside a larger order, even when that order remained frightening. So are these traditions memories of visitors from the stars? The honest answer is that the evidence does not allow that conclusion. Similar mythic patterns are not enough. Celestial symbolism is not enough. Sacred architecture is not enough. A god descending is not enough. A flying chariot is not enough. A disputed report about star knowledge is not enough. Extraordinary claims require more than resemblance. But the opposite answer, that there is nothing here, also feels too thin. There is something here. There is a repeated human encounter with the heavens so intense that it shaped religion, kingship, death, time, architecture, and identity across the world. That may not be evidence of extraterrestrial visitation, but it is evidence of something profound. The sky has always been one of humanity's greatest engines of meaning. Perhaps the stars did not send gods down to us. Perhaps we sent meaning up to them, and once that meaning was there, shining above fields and tombs and cities, it began to look back with a face we recognized, not because the sky was empty, but because human beings have never been able to live beneath emptiness for long. Chapter 14. The modern birth of the ancient astronaut idea. The ancient astronaut idea did not come from the ancient world. It came from the modern one. That may sound obvious, but it is often forgotten. The theory was born not in a temple archive, not beside a broken tablet, not inside a pyramid chamber, but in an age of rockets, radar, atomic power, satellites, and science fiction paperbacks. It grew in a century when humanity stopped merely imagining the sky and began entering it with machines. For thousands of years, people looked upward and saw gods. Then, suddenly, we looked upward and saw destinations. That shift changed the way the past was read. A divine descent, once understood as sacred authority entering the human world, could now be imagined as a landing. A radiant chariot could become a vehicle. A heavenly realm could become another planet. A god with knowledge could become an instructor from the stars. The ancient sky had always been alive with meaning, but the 20th century gave that meaning a metal skin. The timing matters. After airplanes, space probes, and lunar missions entered public consciousness, it became easier to believe that older stories of heavenly beings might be garbled. Memories of technology. The sky was no longer unreachable. It had been crossed. If modern humans could leave Earth, then perhaps someone else had done it long before us. The idea had a certain emotional logic. It made the ancient world feel less distant, and the modern world feel less alone. Popular books helped turn that feeling into a movement. Writers of alternative history gathered myths, monuments, religious images, unexplained engineering achievements, and astronomical knowledge from many cultures, then arranged them into a single provocative story. Ancient people had encountered beings from beyond Earth, mistaken them for gods, and preserved the memory in myth. Later, television amplified the idea further, giving it atmosphere, repetition, and the seductive rhythm of the unanswered question. It worked because it did not begin with nothing. That is important to admit. Ancient civilizations really did build extraordinary monuments. They really did track the heavens with impressive care. Their myths really do contain gods descending, shining beings, sky journeys, world ages, floods, celestial weapons, and knowledge framed as divine. The raw material is genuinely fascinating. The problem is not that modern mystery writers noticed strange patterns. The problem is that noticing a pattern is not the same as proving a cause. A good mystery begins with attention. A bad theory ends too quickly. The ancient astronaut idea often moves from "this is unusual" to "therefore extraterrestrials," with a confidence the evidence cannot support. A pyramid becomes too precise for human builders. A calendar becomes too sophisticated for human observers. A myth becomes too vivid to be poetry. A non-European culture's achievement becomes suspicious simply because modern audiences were not taught to expect brilliance from it. That last point is uncomfortable, but necessary. Some versions of the theory carry an old prejudice in a new costume. They say they are praising ancient people, but the praise is strange. This is so impressive. Humans like them could not have done it alone. The visitor becomes a way of avoiding the harder and more respectful conclusion that ancient societies with time, labor, observation, organization, and religious motivation were capable of astonishing things. Of course, not every believer in the theory is motivated by disrespect. Many are driven by wonder. They want the past to be larger than the textbook version. They sense correctly that ancient religion and architecture contain depths often flattened by classroom summaries. They are bored by explanations that make the world feel small. In that sense, the ancient astronaut idea survives because it protects awe. But it does so at a cost. It often replaces ancient meanings with modern fantasies. It turns sacred texts into engineering notes, temples into launch facilities, gods into biological visitors, and myth into malfunctioning memory. The result may feel grand, but it can strip away the very human richness that made these traditions endure. The 20th century was especially fertile ground for this transformation, because it was an age of both triumph and anxiety. Space exploration opened the heavens, but nuclear weapons darkened the future. Science promised mastery, yet also revealed how fragile human life could be. In that atmosphere, stories of superior beings guiding early humanity carried a strange comfort. Perhaps we had been watched. Perhaps we had been helped. Perhaps civilization had a hidden parent. There is something deeply human in that wish. It is not so different from older myths in which kingship descends from heaven, or divine beings teach agriculture, writing, law, or ritual. The modern version changes the vocabulary, but the longing remains familiar. We want knowledge to have a source. We want order to have a giver. We want the terrifying accident of history to contain a design. Ancient astronaut theory is, in this sense, a modern mythology about ancient mythology. It explains gods by creating a new kind of god, the advanced visitor. More technological, less sacred perhaps, but still placed above us, still wiser, still descending, still carrying answers we do not possess. The spaceship replaces the thunderbolt. The astronaut helmet replaces the halo. The distant planet replaces heaven. The shape is older than the theory itself. That may be why it feels so convincing to many people. It does not merely argue, it resonates. It uses the old vertical imagination, higher beings above, knowledge descending, humanity receiving, and dresses it in the language of science and space exploration. It feels modern while satisfying an ancient instinct. But a story can be meaningful without being true. That is the difficult balance. We should not mock the question, because the question emerges from real wonder. We should not accept the answer too easily, because the answer often outruns the evidence. The past deserves better than disbelief dressed as skepticism, but also better than speculation dressed as revelation. The modern birth of the ancient astronaut idea tells us less about what happened in Sumer, Egypt, India, Greece, or Mesoamerica than about what happened to us when the sky became reachable. We reread the gods through our machines, and once we did, heaven changed shape. It no longer looked only like the home of divine order, radiant beings, or immortal stars. It began to look like a place one might travel from, and perhaps return to. The ancient stories did not change on the tablets, temple walls, or in the epics. But we changed, and brought new eyes to them. Sometimes new eyes reveal, sometimes they project. The challenge is knowing which is happening before the projection becomes a legend of its own. Chapter 15. What the evidence can and cannot say. At some point, every mystery has to face the ground. Not to kill wonder, not to flatten the story into a dull list of approved conclusions, but because without ground, mystery becomes weightless. It floats wherever the imagination wants it to go, and soon every star is a signal, every carving is a helmet. Every mythic journey is a flight log. Every gap in the record is treated as proof of whatever we hoped to find there. The past is more difficult than that, and more interesting. When we ask whether ancient gods were visitors from the stars, we are really standing at the crossing of several different kinds of evidence. Mythology is one. Archaeology is another. Textual interpretation is another. Astronomy, architecture, anthropology, and modern popular culture all add their own voices. The trouble begins when these voices are treated as if they all speak the same language. They do not. A myth can preserve memory, but it is not the same thing as a witness statement. A temple can align with a celestial event, but that does not make it a machine. A calendar can be astonishingly precise, but precision does not require outside teachers. A god can descend from heaven without being a biological organism from another planet. A broken text can be suggestive without being a missing page from a cosmic manual. This distinction is not small. It is the line between interpretation and invention. Archaeological evidence works best when it gives us material traces. Buildings, tools, inscriptions, burials, roads, offerings, pigments, bones, fragments of daily life. It can tell us what people made, where they lived, what they valued, what they ate, what they traded, what they repaired, what they buried with care. It can show patterns of labor, organization, technology, and belief. But archaeology is usually cautious because objects do not explain themselves completely. A stone shaft pointing toward the sky may matter, but how it matters depends on context. Is there a text? A repeated architectural pattern? A ritual tradition? A later interpretation? A measurable alignment? A reason to connect it with a specific star or date? Or are we seeing a line and then building a story because the line looks meaningful to us? That question can feel less exciting than saying, "This proves contact." But it is the question that protects the ancient world from becoming our mirror. Textual evidence brings its own difficulties. Ancient writings were copied, damaged, translated, edited, reinterpreted, and sometimes preserved only in fragments. Words change meaning. Genres matter. A hymn is not a manual. A royal inscription is not neutral journalism. A myth is not trying to do the same work as an astronomical table. Even a careful translation carries choices, because no language crosses into another without leaving something behind. This is why the same passage can become two different stories in two different hands. A careful reader asks what the text is doing. Is it praising a god? Establishing a king's legitimacy? Explaining ritual order? Telling a cosmic drama? Preserving a local tradition? Warning of disaster? Entertaining an audience? The ancient world did not separate poetry, theology, politics, and memory as neatly as we might like. A text can be beautiful, strategic, sacred, and historically useful all at once. But useful does not mean literal in every detail. That is not an insult to the text. It is respect for its form. Modern speculation often becomes strongest where the evidence is weakest. A missing explanation becomes a doorway. A damaged object becomes a code. A vague description becomes a technical term. And because ancient people are no longer here to correct us, we can make them say almost anything if we are careless enough. The responsible approach is not to refuse unusual possibilities in advance. It is to ask what kind of proof would actually be needed. If ancient extraterrestrial contact occurred in a material way, we would expect more than symbolic resemblance. We might expect physical artifacts inconsistent with known technologies and securely excavated from reliable contexts. We might expect unambiguous texts describing something outside the symbolic language of the culture, with details that cannot be explained by ordinary observation, borrowing, metaphor, or later interpretation. We might expect biological, metallurgical, engineering, or astronomical evidence that survives scrutiny across disciplines. That is a high standard because the claim is high, and so far, the evidence usually offered does not meet it. What we have instead is a vast and beautiful pattern of sky-centered meaning. We have celestial calendars, sacred architecture, star-linked kingship, divine descent myths, planetary gods, afterlife journeys, and ritual systems. Tied to the motion of the heavens, these are real. They deserve attention, but they do not automatically point beyond humanity. In many cases, they point more powerfully toward humanity itself, toward our talent for watching, toward our fear of disorder, toward our need to place death somewhere, toward our habit of making authority vertical, toward the astonishing ability of ancient societies to bind observation, labor, ritual, and story into systems that could endure for centuries. This is where the ancient astronaut idea can accidentally rob the past of its greatest achievement. It sees complexity and assumes assistance. It sees precision and assumes instruction. It sees mythic grandeur and assumes misunderstood technology. But ancient people were not primitive observers waiting for someone from the sky to explain the sky to them. They were sophisticated builders of meaning. They had fewer instruments than we do, but not smaller minds. They watched for generations. They recorded patterns. They trained specialists. They built with patience. They argued through myth. They made the heavens part of law, farming, kingship, death, and memory. Their knowledge was not modern science, but it was not nonsense. It was knowledge shaped by a different relationship between measurement and meaning. That relationship may be hard for us because modern culture often separates wonder from accuracy. We think a thing becomes less sacred when explained, or less true when symbolic. Ancient cultures often did not share that anxiety. A star could be measurable and divine. A ritual could be practical and cosmic. A myth could be imaginary in form and serious in meaning. The evidence, then, says something rich but restrained. It says that the sky mattered almost everywhere. It says that celestial order became a model for earthly order. It says that gods were imagined as descending, because the heavens were the visible home of power, rhythm, light, and fate. It says that modern people, living after rockets, may be tempted to mistake sacred height for physical distance. What it cannot say, at least not honestly from the evidence we have, is that the gods were extraterrestrial visitors. That conclusion may still fascinate. It may still inspire novels, late-night debates, documentaries, and a certain kind of thrilling doubt. But fascination does not make evidence stronger. A mystery does not become more respectful by being exaggerated. The better mystery is quieter. How did human beings, with naked eyes and disciplined memory, build such vast symbolic worlds from the lights above them? How did they turn the sky into law, death into ascent, kingship into cosmic duty, and time into sacred machinery? How did they make the heavens speak without microphones, engines, or signals from another world? That question does not shrink the story. It restores it, because what the evidence can say is already remarkable. Ancient humanity looked upward and created civilizations in conversation with the sky. What it cannot say is that the conversation began somewhere else. Chapter 16. The gods we sent back to the stars. In the end, the sky remains, after the tablets are translated, after the pyramids are measured, after the hymns are compared, after the planets are named and renamed, after the theories rise and collapse and rise again. The sky is still there, above us, carrying more silence than any civilization has ever been able to explain. The oldest question may not be whether gods literally came from space. It may be why human beings have always placed their greatest powers overhead. We did it before telescopes. We did it before rockets. We did it when the night was darker than most of us will ever know, when stars appeared in such numbers that the sky must have felt less like a ceiling and more like a country. We looked up and gave that country rulers, roads, messengers, fires, judges, serpents, chariots, boats, thrones, and dead kings who refused to vanish. The Anunnaki became part of one story. Egypt gave the dead a route toward imperishable lights. The Vedic poets filled the heavens with radiance and sacred motion. Greek myth gave the sky a court of brilliant, dangerous personalities. Mesoamerica read time, blood, and obligation in celestial cycles. Modern writers living after the age of engines sent those gods even farther upward and dressed them as visitors from other worlds. Each age remade the sky in its own image. That may be the most honest conclusion we can reach. The evidence does not force us to believe that extraterrestrial beings descended into ancient cities and became gods. The surviving texts, monuments, calendars, and myths are better understood first within the cultures that created them. They speak of order, death, kingship, fertility, fear, memory, and the struggle to make life meaningful beneath forces no human hand could command. But the ancient astronaut idea did not appear from nowhere. It is another expression of the same old instinct. We still want the answers to come from above. We still imagine that wisdom might descend, that someone older and greater might have crossed the darkness before us, that humanity may not be alone in its confusion. The costume changed. The longing did not. Perhaps that is why these stories endure. They allow us to stand between humility and ambition. We are small under the stars, but we are also the creatures who name them. We are frightened by the heavens, but we build calendars from them. We bury our dead, then imagine them rising. We discover planets are worlds, then wonder who else might be looking back. The sky was never empty because we never allowed it to be. We filled it with gods when we needed order. We filled it with ancestors when we needed comfort. We filled it with omens when we needed warning. We filled it with spacecraft when our machines taught us new dreams. And through all of it, the same human gesture remains. The head tilted upward, the eyes searching, the mind refusing to accept that darkness means nothing. Maybe the gods did not come down from the stars. Maybe we sent them there, not as a deception and not as a failure, but as one of the oldest acts of imagination our species ever performed. We took everything too large for the earth to hold: power, death, justice, terror, hope, and placed it above us where it could shine beyond reach. And tonight, when we look up, we inherit that same unfinished conversation. The stars no longer look like divine lamps to most of us. We know they are suns, burning at distances the ancient world could not measure. But knowledge has not emptied them. If anything, it has made them stranger. The sky is no longer the home of the old gods, but it is still the place where human certainty runs out.